Sabrina slid a single $1 bill across the white tablecloth until it stopped against Vivian's hand. "You should keep that," she said with a small smile. "Looks like you'll need it before long." Nobody laughed. Benjamin opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wouldn't look at his wife. Around the table, a few people suddenly found their coffee cups far more interesting than the woman who had just been humiliated in front of them. Vivian didn't touch the bill. She looked at it for a long second, then slowly lifted her eyes to Benjamin. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. Somehow, that made the silence heavier. Without saying a single word, she stood, picked up her phone, and walked toward the restaurant entrance. Benjamin pushed back his chair so quickly it scraped across the floor. "Vivian?" She never turned around. Outside, she listened more than she spoke. When she finally answered, her voice was calm enough that anyone passing by would have thought she was confirming a lunch reservation. "I understand," she said. "Then let's do everything exactly the way it should have been done from the beginning." She ended the call, slipped her phone into her purse, and stood there for another heartbeat. Inside the dining room, the conversation slowly started again. Nobody at that table, not Benjamin, not Sabrina, not a single person watching, had any idea that 4 quiet sentences had just changed the future of everyone in that room. Welcome to Mr. Graham's story, where every story leaves a lesson. Whether you're new here or part of our growing family, thank you for being here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and as the story unfolds, tell me what you would have done in the same situation. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more meaningful stories to people around the world. Now, let's begin today's story. When Vivian walked back inside, the dollar bill was still lying exactly where Sabrina had left it. Benjamin was standing now, uncertain whether to apologize, explain, or pretend none of it had happened. Sabrina's confident smile had faded just enough to notice if someone was paying attention. Vivian returned to her seat, folded her napkin beside her untouched plate, and quietly thanked the waiter who offered to clear the table. She never looked at the dollar. She never looked at Sabrina. Only Benjamin noticed the small change in her expression. For the first time since he'd known her, it wasn't hurt. It was certainty. Vivian Carter could still remember the way her mother closed every checkbook before dinner, even when there were bills left to pay. "Money can wait 20 minutes, Denise would say, sliding the folder into the kitchen drawer. People shouldn't. It wasn't a lesson about budgeting. It was about priorities. Growing up on Charlotte's west side, Vivian never felt poor, even when the family skipped vacations or drove the same aging Honda long after neighbors upgraded their cars. Denise worked as a public school administrator, the kind who somehow knew every student's name and every teacher's problem. She had a habit of solving everyone else's emergencies while quietly postponing her own plans. When the washing machine finally broke for good, a neighbor asked why she didn't just finance a new one. Denise smiled. "Because I don't like making next year's paycheck solve today's impatience." Vivian had rolled her eyes all the way home. "You really could have just said no." "I could have." "So why didn't you?" "Because people usually remember how you answer them more than what you answer." At 14, Vivian thought her mother had an unusual response for everything. Years later, she realized Denise simply thought before she spoke. That habit stayed with her daughter. While classmates rushed to defend themselves whenever someone underestimated them, Vivian usually stayed quiet. It wasn't insecurity. She genuinely wanted to know who people became when they believed no one important was watching. More often than not, they answered that question themselves. By the time she finished college, Denise's health had begun changing in ways neither of them expected. It started with headaches, then fatigue, then the promise that she'd schedule an appointment after things calmed down. Things never did. The stroke came on an ordinary Tuesday. Vivian spent 2 days in a hospital room, listening to machines that somehow made the silence louder. Her mother never woke up. The funeral was small, exactly how Denise would have wanted it. What surprised everyone came afterward. The attorney unfolded a stack of folders across the conference table and began explaining things Vivian had never heard before. Minority ownership in a neighborhood shopping center, partnership interests in 2 commercial buildings, investments in several local businesses, retirement accounts that had quietly grown for decades. The attorney paused when he noticed the confusion on Vivian's face. "Your mother never mentioned any of this?" Vivian slowly shook her head. No. She was. Remarkably disciplined. That sounded like Denise. Not rich, disciplined. For weeks, relatives offered advice. You should sell everything. Take the money. Start fresh. Instead, Vivian carried every folder home and spread them across her dining table. The paperwork looked like another language, so she learned the language. Her evenings changed. Streaming shows became finance lectures. Weekends became accounting textbooks. She enrolled in executive finance courses while keeping her regular job. Some nights, she fell asleep over partnership agreements with a highlighter still in her hand. She asked questions that embarrassed her, then asked more. An older instructor smiled after class one evening. You know why you're improving so quickly? Vivian shrugged. I don't. Most people only study investments after they lose money. She laughed softly. I'm trying not to. Little by little, the document stopped looking intimidating. She began recognizing patterns, learning governance, understanding voting rights, reading contracts without needing to reread every paragraph 3 times. She discovered something that surprised her. The people making the best financial decisions weren't always the smartest people in the room. They were usually the least emotional. That lesson followed her into Harborstone Capital. She started in a role few people noticed, reviewing financial reports and helping evaluate struggling regional companies. Meetings were filled with louder personalities, eager to prove themselves. Vivian rarely interrupted. She listened. When she finally spoke, it was usually to ask one quiet question everyone else had overlooked. Those questions saved the firm from more than one expensive mistake. Years passed. Senior partners began asking for her opinion before making difficult decisions. Not because she demanded attention, because she had earned trust. Outside the firm, almost nobody knew her name. She preferred it that way. One afternoon, after a board meeting finally adjourned, an older partner lingered by the door. You know, he said, gathering his notes, people keep underestimating you. Vivian smiled as she slipped her notebook into her bag. I've noticed. Doesn't it bother you? She thought about her mother for a moment before answering. Not nearly as much as it usually ends up bothering them. The partner chuckled, though something in his expression suggested he understood exactly what she meant. Vivian turned off the conference room lights and headed for the elevator, unaware that before long, the habit of letting people underestimate her would quietly shape the most painful chapter of her life. Vivian never planned to meet her future husband on a construction site. She almost skipped the Habitat for Humanity volunteer weekend altogether. A coworker had canceled at the last minute and asked if she could fill in. I don't know the first thing about building a house, Vivian had said. You don't have to. They need people for registration too. She showed up in old jeans, work boots, and a Charlotte Hornets t-shirt. She didn't mind getting dirty. By 9 that morning, she was helping volunteers sign waivers while trying to keep stacks of paperwork from blowing across the parking lot. Someone caught one of the folders before it disappeared into a muddy ditch. You look like you were about to lose that battle. She turned to see a tall man balancing a clipboard under one arm and holding the escaped paperwork in the other. He smiled easily. Not rehearsed, just comfortable. Thanks, Vivian said. I owe you one. Nah, he laughed. I'd rather you tell whoever keeps ordering lumber that we don't actually need twice as much as we asked for. She blinked. I don't order lumber. Then you're already doing better than whoever did. That made her laugh. His name tag read Benjamin Lawson. Over the next few hours, they crossed paths without trying to. Once, while organizing volunteers. Again, while unloading supplies. Later, while handing out bottled water during lunch. Benjamin seemed to know everyone. Crew members, electricians, college students volunteering for extra credit, retired couples swinging hammers for the first time. He greeted each person exactly the same, like they mattered. Vivian noticed that. He noticed something too. Whenever disagreements came up, she never rushed to settle them. She listened first, then asked one question that usually solved the problem faster than anyone arguing. Late that afternoon, Benjamin found her sitting on an overturned bucket eating a turkey sandwich. You always this quiet? She smiled. Only until somebody gives me a reason not to be. He nodded thoughtfully. My mom says I talk enough for 3 people. I'm starting to believe her. He laughed hard enough that another volunteer looked over. From that day forward, they kept finding reasons to meet again. Sometimes coffee, sometimes helping with another habitat project, sometimes long walks through Freedom Park after work, because neither of them felt like going home yet. Nothing about their relationship felt rushed. Benjamin filled silence naturally. Vivian never felt pressured to compete with it. Nearly 2 years later, they married in a small ceremony, attended mostly by family and close friends. The reception ended before 10 because both of them preferred conversations over dancing. Benjamin apologized afterward. I know, weddings are supposed to be bigger. Vivian slipped off her shoes as they walked to the car. I married you. She looked over with a grin. The party was optional. Married life settled into routines almost without discussion. Saturday mornings meant grocery shopping. Benjamin insisted on choosing produce even though he was terrible at judging ripe avocados. Vivian eventually stopped correcting him. Sunday afternoons belonged to Benjamin's mother. The 3 of them often shared simple dinners where his mother teased him for still carving roast chicken exactly the way his father had taught him. You hold that knife like it's a construction tool, she'd joke. It works, doesn't it? It terrifies me, but yes. Vivian would quietly laugh while reaching for another dinner roll. They postponed vacations more than once because work became busy. Neither complained much. One evening, while paying bills at the kitchen table, Benjamin glanced toward her laptop. You still working? Just reviewing something. You work too much. She raised an eyebrow. I'm pretty sure you said that while answering 3 emails. Fair. They smiled. It was ordinary. Comfortable, the kind of marriage that rarely made interesting stories because nothing dramatic happened, at least, not yet. Friends often assumed Benjamin earned more money. It happened at cookouts, business dinners, neighborhood gatherings. Someone would joke about Vivian marrying well. Benjamin usually smiled awkwardly and changed the subject. Vivian never corrected anyone. The assumption simply floated past. One evening after a charity fundraiser, Benjamin loosened his tie as they walked toward the parking garage. Does it ever bother you? What? People thinking I'm the successful one. She thought about it. No. You've never wanted to tell them? Tell them what? The truth. Vivian shrugged. If it matters that much to somebody, they'll eventually figure it out. Benjamin looked ahead instead of at her. Yeah. His answer came just a little too slowly. Vivian noticed. She assumed he was tired. Benjamin told himself he was simply protecting his pride. Neither realized that one quiet conversation had exposed a difference they still didn't understand. And before long, that difference would become the space where someone else quietly stepped in. The slowdown didn't happen all at once. One month, Benjamin was turning down projects because his crews were booked solid. 6 months later, he was staring at a calendar with entire weeks left blank. Commercial developers across North Carolina began delaying projects as interest rates climbed. Banks became cautious. Office buildings that had looked profitable the year before suddenly stopped making sense. Benjamin refused to panic. We've survived slow seasons before, he told his management team during a Monday meeting. We'll get through this one too. His project manager shifted uneasily. We've got enough work for maybe 3 months. We'll find more. Nobody argued. They wanted to believe him. Benjamin believed it too. At first, instead of laying people off, he borrowed against future contracts. Then he extended payment schedules with suppliers. When that wasn't enough, he signed another line of credit. Every decision made sense on its own. Together, they became dangerous. At home, very little changed on the surface. Benjamin still kissed Vivian goodbye before work, still asked what she wanted for dinner, still joked whenever she caught him eating cereal straight from the box. But something small had disappeared. Sleep. More and more nights, Vivian would wake around 2 in the morning and find his side of the bed empty. She'd walk quietly into the kitchen. Benjamin would be sitting at the table with his laptop open. Financial reports, cash flow projections, spreadsheets. The screen would disappear the moment he heard her footsteps. You okay? She'd ask. Yeah. You've been awake a while. Just couldn't sleep. She'd rest a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. He'd force a smile. I know, but he never closed the laptop until she'd gone back upstairs. Vivian wanted to ask more. She didn't. She believed everyone deserved the chance to solve a difficult season without feeling watched. Benjamin mistook that trust for permission to keep hiding. Weeks later, Harborstone Capital received a restructuring request from one of Lawson Structural Group's lenders. The company wasn't failing, not yet, but the bank wanted additional investment support before renewing certain facilities. Inside Harborstone's executive offices, the proposal landed on the agenda for the next investment committee meeting. Vivian skimmed the summary until one line stopped her. Lawson Structural Group. She closed the folder. The room continued discussing unrelated matters while she quietly collected her thoughts. When the meeting reached the proposal, she spoke before anyone else could. I need to disclose a conflict. The room became still. My husband owns this company. No one looked surprised. One of the attorneys simply nodded and began making notes. Vivian continued. I'll remove myself from any discussion or vote. The board chairman thanked her. Outside legal counsel later recommended an even stricter approach. Vivian would take no part in negotiations, due diligence, or oversight involving Lawson Structural Group. An independent committee would handle every decision, with formal documentation at each step to ensure complete transparency. She signed the conflict paperwork that same afternoon. There was no hesitation. The firm's integrity mattered. So did Benjamin's. When she came home that evening, Benjamin was standing over the grill in the backyard. He smiled. Perfect timing. She smiled back. Something smells good. Burgers. They ate dinner on the patio while talking about everything except work. His mother's upcoming doctor's appointment, a neighbor's new puppy that barked at leaves, whether they should finally replace the patio furniture. Twice, Vivian almost mentioned Harborstone. Twice, she stopped herself. She knew Benjamin. If he learned her firm was reviewing his company, he wouldn't hear governance procedures or legal ethics. He'd hear one thing. His wife had the power to help him, and Benjamin had spent his entire life believing that a man who needed rescuing had already failed. Several weeks later, Lawson Structural Group received approval for a restructuring package under Harborstone's independent committee. The financing stabilized payroll. Suppliers relaxed. The bank withdrew its immediate concerns. Benjamin walked through the front door carrying a bottle of champagne. We did it. Vivienne hugged him. I knew you would. He laughed, with the relief of someone who had been holding his breath for months. I told you it'd work out. She smiled, but said nothing. She never told him how many times she had almost picked up the phone, or how carefully she had chosen not to. Across town, Harborstone's compliance department quietly opened a routine file after noticing several small reporting inconsistencies connected to Lawson Structural Group. Nothing dramatic, just enough missing pieces to justify a closer look. No one, not even Vivian, realized those ordinary questions would eventually lead straight back to Benjamin, and to the woman who would soon convince him that saying yes was far easier than hearing the truth. Benjamin first met Sabrina in a conference room that smelled faintly of fresh paint and burnt coffee. She arrived 10 minutes early carrying nothing but a legal pad and a tablet. No slides? Benjamin asked. She smiled. If I need a slideshow to convince you, I'm probably not very good at my job. He laughed. I like that. She had been hired as an outside business development consultant to help Lawson Structural Group find new commercial opportunities while the market struggled. Her resume was impressive, but what impressed Benjamin more was how quickly she learned the room. She noticed who interrupted people, who needed recognition, who liked being challenged. Benjamin wasn't one of them. He didn't want someone to argue with him. He wanted someone who believed he could still win. After the meeting, she caught up with him in the parking garage. You know what your problem is? Benjamin looked over. I've got a list. Which one? You spend half your meetings explaining why something won't work before anyone else gets the chance. I call that being realistic. I call it borrowing tomorrow's disappointment. He shook his head with a grin. You always talk like that. Only when I'm right. Instead of irritating him, it made him laugh. For the first time in months, Someone wasn't asking him about shrinking margins or overdue invoices. She was talking about possibilities. Within weeks, Sabrina became a regular presence around the office. She remembered employees' names. She brought coffee for reception when she picked one up for herself. She congratulated project managers after winning even small contracts. People liked her, Benjamin especially, not because she flirted, at least not at first. She listened. More importantly, she admired. One evening, they stayed late, reviewing a proposal that had just fallen apart. Benjamin leaned back in his chair. "I don't know what I'm missing anymore." Sabrina barely looked up from the papers. "You're assuming every setback means you're doing something wrong, doesn't it?" "No." She slid the proposal across the desk. "It means the market's scared." He rubbed his forehead. "The bank doesn't seem to care about that." "The bank cares about numbers." "And?" "I care about instincts." Benjamin smiled for the first time that day. "I was starting to think mine were gone." "They're not." She said it so naturally that he almost believed her before he'd thought about it. At home that night, Vivian was sitting at the kitchen island with 2 bowls of pasta waiting. "You made it," she said. "Barely." She stood to warm his dinner again. "Long meeting?" "Yeah." "Good or bad?" Benjamin hesitated while loosening his tie. "I think maybe better." She smiled. "I'm glad." She wanted to ask more. Instead, she handed him his plate. Benjamin appreciated that she didn't press him. Sabrina would have filled the silence. Vivian respected it. Neither approach was wrong. But Benjamin was beginning to crave the one that demanded less honesty from him. The changes happened quietly after that. If Benjamin mentioned a risky idea during a meeting, Sabrina never started with reasons it might fail. She started with reasons it might succeed. When lenders questioned his projections, she reminded him that cautious people rarely built successful companies. When an employee suggested scaling back expansion plans, Sabrina waited until they were alone. "They've already accepted losing." "You don't think I should?" "I think people follow confidence." Those words stayed with him, not because they were always true, because they were exactly what he wanted to hear. He found himself stopping by her office more often. Sometimes it was about contracts. Sometimes it wasn't. One afternoon, he caught himself laughing harder than he had in months. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly 7. His phone buzzed. "Vivian, everything okay?" He stared at the message for a second before typing, "Running behind. Don't wait for dinner." Across the desk, Sabrina looked up. "Your wife?" He nodded. "You should go." "I will." But he didn't leave for another 40 minutes. By the time he walked through his front door, the kitchen lights were off. A plate sat in the microwave with a handwritten note beneath it. "Heat for 2 minutes. Love you." Benjamin stood there longer than he meant to. Then he folded the note once, slipped it into his pocket, and quietly closed the microwave without eating. He wasn't hungry anymore. He just couldn't explain why the place he felt most understood was slowly becoming the one he was spending less time trying to get home to. It wasn't the late nights that unsettled Vivian. Benjamin had always worked hard. It was the way he came home afterward. He used to walk through the front door talking before he even set down his keys. Now he'd pause in the hallway, almost like he needed a moment to decide which version of himself was walking into the house. "Hey," she'd call from the kitchen. "Hey." "How'd it go?" "Fine." Just one word. Then he'd disappear upstairs to shower before dinner. The routine became so consistent that Vivienne stopped asking detailed questions. Not because she didn't care, but because every conversation seemed to reach the same quiet, dead end. One Saturday morning, they drove to Benjamin's mother's house together. His mother looked from one of them to the other while pouring coffee. "You two okay?" Benjamin answered too quickly. "Why wouldn't we be?" She smiled gently. "I didn't say you weren't." Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then Benjamin asked if she needed help fixing the loose gate in the backyard. The subject changed. Vivian noticed. So did his mother. Neither mentioned it again. Lawson Structural Group slowly found new business, but the pressure inside the company never really disappeared. Every project seemed to require another loan. Every loan required another explanation. Benjamin spent more evenings with Sabrina reviewing forecasts, meeting potential clients, or preparing presentations that stretched long past business hours. Sometimes they actually worked. Sometimes they ordered takeout and talked about everything except work. She knew how to make difficult days sound temporary. "You know what I think?" she said one evening while pushing aside a stack of contracts. Benjamin rubbed his tired eyes. "I'm afraid to ask. I think you've forgotten who you were before all this." He looked at her. "What does that mean?" "You used to make decisions." "I still do." "No." She shook her head. "Now you ask permission." He frowned. "I ask questions." "Exactly." She leaned back. "The Benjamin everyone talks about." He trusted himself. He didn't answer, because part of him missed that man too. At home, Vivian folded laundry while listening to the garage door open almost an hour later than Benjamin had promised. He walked in carrying 2 coffees. "I grabbed one for you." She looked at the cup. "It's my favorite." "I remembered." She smiled. "Thank you." Neither mentioned that the coffee had probably been purchased hours earlier. Neither mentioned it had already gone cold. She microwaved it anyway. They sat together on the couch watching a baseball game neither of them was really paying attention to. Benjamin's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, just for a second. Then he turned the phone face down. Vivian noticed. She reached for another handful of popcorn instead of asking who it was. Trust wasn't something she wanted to weaponize. Benjamin told himself he was protecting her from unnecessary stress. Neither realized they were protecting different versions of the same lie. The first time Benjamin kissed Sabrina, it wasn't planned. They had just finished celebrating a contract neither of them had expected to win. She hugged him. He didn't step back. Neither spoke for several seconds afterward. Finally, Benjamin exhaled. "This shouldn't have happened." Sabrina looked at him steadily. "Then why does it feel like you stopped pretending for the first time in months?" He didn't answer. Silence became its own answer. Across town, Harbor Stone's compliance department continued reviewing Lawson Structural Group's reporting. The questions remained small. Consulting invoices that didn't quite match. Travel expenses submitted without complete documentation. Vendor payments routed through unfamiliar companies. Nothing alarming on its own, enough to justify asking for more records. Vivian saw only the request that additional documents had been ordered. Because of her conflict restrictions, she immediately closed the file without reading further. She wasn't allowed to involve herself. She had insisted on that rule. A few nights later, Benjamin climbed into bed after midnight. Vivian was still awake. She didn't turn on the lamp. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. Benjamin stared at the ceiling. "Yeah. You've said that a lot lately." "I know." Another silence settled between them. Not angry, not comfortable, just unfinished. Vivian reached across the bed until her hand found his. For a moment, he held it. Then his phone vibrated on the nightstand. He let go. "I should check that." Vivian withdrew her hand before he picked up the phone. She rolled onto her side and closed her eyes. Benjamin watched the message appear on the screen. "Sabrina, tomorrow's going to be a better day. You'll see." He read it twice before locking the phone again. In the darkness, neither husband nor wife realized they had just crossed a line that would be much harder to see than an affair, because it had started long before either of them admitted it aloud. Benjamin never talked about Harbor Stone, not because he meant to hide anything. The restructuring was over. The company was breathing again. In his mind, it had become another problem he'd solved, another chapter best left behind. So when Sabrina casually asked one afternoon, he answered without thinking. "Who financed everything?" "Harbor Stone Capital." "I've heard of them." "They're different." "How?" "They don't throw money around. They ask 1,000 questions first." She smirked. "So, they finally figured out you're worth betting on." Benjamin smiled. "I guess." He left out the part about how close he'd come to hearing "no." A few weeks later, Sabrina attended a regional commercial real estate luncheon. One of Harbor Stone's vice presidents gave a presentation about long-term investment strategy. Afterward, people gathered in small circles around the ballroom. Sabrina wandered over. "I really enjoyed your presentation." Thank you. You work with Harbor Stone? I do. It must be interesting working for people with that kind of money. The executive laughed. Sometimes. So, who's actually in charge over there? He smiled politely. It's complicated. Meaning? We have a board. And? He shrugged. Most people outside the company don't really care how the ownership works. Someone else interrupted the conversation. Sabrina walked away with only half an answer. Half an answer quickly became a full assumption. That evening, she met Benjamin after work. You know what's funny? What? I've never seen your wife at any of these finance events. Benjamin looked up from the menu. She stays busy. Doing what? She works. I know that. Sabrina stirred her iced tea. I just mean. She hesitated long enough to sound thoughtful. She seems happy letting you carry everything. Benjamin frowned slightly. What do you mean? Nothing bad. She smiled. Some people like having ambitious husbands. Benjamin looked out the restaurant window. He could have told her the truth. That Vivian loved her work. That she had built a remarkable career. That she understood finance better than almost anyone he knew. Instead, he said the simplest thing. She's pretty private. Sabrina nodded, as though that confirmed everything. Private, dependent, comfortable, safe. She pictured Vivian spending quiet afternoons while Benjamin carried the real pressure of keeping a company alive. The picture wasn't accurate, but Benjamin never reached over to erase it. At home that weekend, Vivian was trimming herbs on the back patio when Benjamin came outside. You've been out here forever. She smiled. They're finally growing. He looked at the small planter boxes. I still don't know how basil survives your schedule. It survives yours, too. He laughed. Fair point. For a moment, everything felt normal again. He reached over and stole one of the cherry tomatoes she just picked. Hey. What? You weren't eating it. I was about to. You waited too long. She rolled her eyes. You've been doing that since we were dating. Some traditions matter. She laughed despite herself. It was a small moment, ordinary, the kind of marriage moment worth almost nothing until it disappears. Benjamin almost told her everything about Sabrina, about the growing confusion inside him, about how exhausted he felt pretending every decision still made sense. Instead, he bit into another tomato. Neither of them spoke. The chance passed. Across town, Harbor Stone's compliance department expanded its review. What had started as routine requests now included interviews with accounting staff and outside vendors. Several consulting payments still couldn't be fully documented. One compliance officer frowned at another spreadsheet. Something's missing. You think it's fraud? I think we don't know yet. Keep digging? He nodded. Quietly. Sabrina noticed Benjamin becoming distracted again. You've been somewhere else all week. Just work. You've said that every day. It is work. She leaned forward. Benjamin. He met her eyes. You've spent your whole life proving yourself. Feels like it. So stop apologizing for succeeding. Those words landed exactly where she intended. She wasn't simply encouraging him anymore. She was replacing the voice he listened to when he doubted himself. Benjamin didn't see it happening. Vivian couldn't see it happening. Sabrina didn't realize she was building her confidence on a foundation she completely misunderstood. Because the quiet woman she dismissed as a financially dependent wife wasn't standing outside Benjamin's success. She had quietly been protecting it from the very beginning. And before long, Sabrina was going to make the mistake of treating that silence as weakness. Benjamin mentioned the luncheon on a Tuesday evening while drying dishes beside Vivian. They've invited spouses this year. Vivian looked up from the plate she was putting away. Who's they? A group of developers, lenders, some clients, mostly networking. She nodded. You want me to come? I do. There was a pause. It'll be good for us. The words caught her attention, not because of what he said, because of how carefully he said it. She studied him for a second. Okay. He smiled with visible relief. Thank you. She didn't ask why it mattered so much. She assumed he wanted to reconnect after months of feeling like ships passing in the hallway. She wanted that too. The luncheon was held at an upscale restaurant overlooking downtown Charlotte. Vivian stood in front of her closet that morning with 2 dresses hanging side by side. One was black, the other was navy. She chose the navy dress. Simple, well-tailored, no designer logo, no statement jewelry, just pearl earrings Denise had given her years before. Benjamin came downstairs adjusting his cufflinks. "You look nice." She smiled. "So do you." He reached for his keys. "We should probably leave." During the drive, traffic moved slowly through uptown. Benjamin tapped the steering wheel more than usual. Vivian noticed. "Nervous?" "A little." "Big meeting?" "Something like that." She rested her hand lightly on the center console. "You'll be fine." He gave a quick smile. "I hope so." Neither realized they were talking about completely different things. Inside the restaurant, polished glasses caught the afternoon light. Servers moved quietly between tables. People greeted Benjamin with handshakes and familiar smiles. Vivian followed comfortably a step behind, shaking hands when introduced, never trying to dominate conversations. She preferred listening anyway. A developer recognized Benjamin. "Good to see you." "You too." The man turned toward Vivian. "And you are?" "My wife," Benjamin answered. The developer smiled politely. "Lucky man." Vivian laughed softly. "I think we both got lucky." The conversation moved on. Benjamin glanced at her. She hadn't corrected anyone. She never did. Across the room, Sabrina was already seated. She spotted them the moment they walked in. Her smile never reached her eyes. Everything about the afternoon had been planned carefully. Not officially. Quietly. She had volunteered to help organize seating several weeks earlier. Nobody questioned it. She simply made sure Benjamin and Vivienne would be assigned to her table. When another organizer suggested different seating arrangements, Sabrina casually objected. They already know each other. It sounded reasonable. No one gave it another thought. Now she watched Vivienne greet strangers with the same calm courtesy she'd always found irritating. There was nothing flashy about Benjamin's wife. No expensive labels. No obvious attempt to impress anyone. To Sabrina, that confirmed exactly what she'd believed for months. A woman comfortable living in someone else's success. The host invited everyone to take their seats. Benjamin stopped when he noticed the place cards. His name, Vivienne's, Sabrina's, side by side. He frowned almost imperceptibly. "That's unexpected." Sabrina looked up with practiced surprise. "Oh." She laughed lightly. "What a coincidence." Benjamin forced a smile. "I guess it is." Vivienne quietly pulled out her chair. "If it bothers you, we can ask to switch." Benjamin looked around the crowded room. "They've already started." "It's fine." She sat down. The waiter began pouring water. Conversation drifted naturally around the table. Commercial leasing, interest rates, the Panthers' disappointing season. Someone joked about Charlotte traffic. People laughed. Vivienne contributed when someone asked her opinion about neighborhood redevelopment. Her answer was thoughtful, but brief. Then she listened again. Sabrina watched the others respond warmly to Vivienne. That bothered her more than she'd expected. She had imagined someone timid. Instead, she found someone comfortable enough not to compete for attention. As salads were served, Benjamin excused himself to answer a phone call from one of his project managers. "I'll be right back." He walked toward the lobby. The moment he disappeared, Sabrina leaned slightly closer to Vivienne. "So?" Vivienne looked up. "I've been meaning to ask." "About what?" "What do you do all day when Benjamin's working?" The question landed oddly, not openly rude, not quite friendly either. Vivienne folded her napkin across her lap before answering. "I work." "Oh," Sabrina smiled. "I wasn't sure." Another guest interrupted before Vivienne could say anything else. The conversation shifted, but Sabrina's eyes lingered on her for just a second longer. She hadn't gotten the reaction she'd expected. Not yet. Benjamin returned a minute later, apologizing for stepping away. Lunch continued. The room felt perfectly ordinary. Only one person at the table knew the afternoon wasn't unfolding by accident. And as the entrees arrived, Sabrina quietly decided she was finished with subtlety. The entrees had barely been served when the conversation drifted toward business again. One of the developers smiled across the table. "Benjamin, you've done a remarkable job keeping Lawson Structural Group moving through this market." Benjamin gave a modest shrug. "We've had good people. You make it sound easy. It hasn't been." For a moment, the table settled into respectful silence. Then Sabrina spoke. "It helps when people believe in you." Benjamin glanced at her. "It does." She smiled as though they were sharing a private joke. Vivian noticed the look. She didn't interrupt. Another guest turned toward her. "And what field are you in, Vivian?" She dabbed her napkin against the corner of her mouth before answering. "Investments." "What kind?" "Mostly private investment work." "Oh." The man nodded politely. "That sounds interesting." "It usually is." He smiled, then the conversation drifted elsewhere. Sabrina watched the exchange with quiet amusement. "Private investments," she repeated. "That sounds mysterious." Vivian smiled. "Most paperwork is less exciting than people imagine." A few people chuckled. Sabrina didn't. "You must have a lot of free time if you can explain it that calmly." Benjamin shifted slightly in his chair. "Sabrina." "What?" She looked at him innocently. "I'm complimenting her." Vivian reached for her water. "It's all right." Benjamin looked relieved that she hadn't taken offense. Sabrina noticed that too. She realized Benjamin was counting on Vivian to keep the peace. That made her bolder. She leaned forward. "So, this might sound personal." Vivian met her eyes. "You can always ask. Do you ever get tired of living in your husband's shadow?" The table became noticeably quieter. Someone set down a fork. Another guest looked toward the windows instead. Benjamin let out a short breath. "Sabrina." She held up a hand. "I'm serious." She looked back at Vivienne. "I mean, Benjamin built this incredible company. People respect him everywhere we go." She smiled. "I've always wondered what that's like." Vivian answered without changing her expression. "I've never thought about it that way." "No?" "No." Sabrina tilted her head. "I guess some people are just happy supporting someone else's success." Benjamin finally spoke. "That's enough." His voice wasn't loud. It was uncertain. Sabrina looked at him. "I'm only saying what everyone else is thinking." "No," Benjamin said quietly. "They're not." For a second, it seemed the moment might pass. The waiter appeared to refill water glasses. Someone cleared their throat. Conversation tried to restart. Then Sabrina reached into her purse. She pulled out a folded $1 bill. She smoothed it carefully against the table. Nobody understood why. Not yet. She placed one finger on the edge of the bill, then slowly pushed it across the white tablecloth until it stopped against Vivian's hand. "You should keep that," she said with a small smile, "in case things don't work out." No one moved. Benjamin stared at the bill as if it didn't belong in the room. One of the guests whispered, "Sabrina." She ignored him. "I just thought." She continued softly, "Everyone deserves a little spending money." The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was uncomfortable, embarrassed, the kind of silence people create when they desperately hope someone else will fix the situation. Benjamin looked at Vivienne, then at Sabrina. His lips parted. Nothing came out. Vivian lowered her eyes to the dollar bill. She studied it for several long seconds. Not the amount, the gesture. Then she looked at Benjamin. She didn't ask him if it was true. She didn't ask who Sabrina was. She didn't ask why he hadn't stopped this before it happened. She simply waited. Benjamin couldn't hold her gaze. He looked away first. That was all the answer she needed. Vivian pushed back her chair. The sound echoed more loudly than anyone expected. She picked up her phone from beside her plate. "I'm sorry," she said politely to the others. "Please excuse me for a moment." Her voice never shook. She walked away from the table without touching the dollar bill. Benjamin stood so quickly, his chair scraped across the hardwood floor. "Vivian." She kept walking. Not faster, not slower. She never turned around. Sabrina watched her disappear through the restaurant entrance. Convinced she had finally won, she smiled to herself. She had no idea that the woman she'd just tried to humiliate wasn't leaving to cry. She was about to make the one phone call that would end the protection Benjamin never even knew he had. The restaurant doors closed quietly behind Vivian. Outside, the afternoon traffic rolled through uptown Charlotte like any other weekday. A valet jogged past with a set of keys. Two women laughed as they crossed the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, a bus released its brakes with a hiss. The world hadn't changed. Only hers had. Vivian stood beside one of the large planters near the entrance and unlocked her phone. She didn't scroll through contacts. She knew the number. It rang once. Independent Restructuring Committee. "This is Vivian Carter." There was a brief pause. The woman's tone became more formal. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter. I need to update my conflict file." "Of course." Vivian looked through the restaurant window. Benjamin had stepped away from the table now. He was searching the dining room, then the lobby. He hadn't seen her yet. She spoke calmly. "My personal circumstances have materially changed. I understand. Until now, I've requested that every matter involving Lawson Structural Group receive only the treatment required under our governance policy." The woman remained silent, taking notes. Vivian continued. "I'd like that voluntary instruction withdrawn." Another pause. "To clarify." "Going forward," Vivian said, "I don't want anyone extending professional courtesies out of consideration for my personal relationship. We'll proceed strictly under standard policy." "Exactly. No exceptions." "No exceptions." The woman hesitated. "Would you like us to notify the committee chair today?" "Please." "And the compliance team?" Vivian closed her eyes for the briefest moment. "If existing procedures require it." "They do." "Then follow the process." There was no anger in her voice, no revenge, only precision. The woman answered softly. "We'll update the file immediately." "Thank you." Vivian ended the call before anyone could say anything else. She slipped the phone into her purse and stood still. She thought about her mother, not the investments, not the business. Just one sentence Denise had repeated her entire life. "Real wealth isn't what people notice. It's what protects you when nobody's looking." For years, Vivian had quietly protected Benjamin in every way she ethically could. Not by breaking rules, by refusing to let pride, marriage, or power blur them. She had never asked Harbor Stone to favor his company. She had only asked that he receive the same fair opportunity any worthy business deserved. Now, she couldn't even ask for that. Not after what had happened inside. "Vivian." She turned. Benjamin had come outside. He stopped several feet away. "I can explain." She waited. He rubbed the back of his neck. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "No? I didn't know she was going to." His voice faded. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. "Did she know about me?" Benjamin frowned. "What do you mean?" "Did she know you were married?" He lowered his eyes. "Yes." "Then she knew exactly what she was doing." He couldn't argue with that. "I should have stopped it." "Yes." But you didn't." The words weren't sharp. They were quiet. Benjamin looked as though he wanted to step closer. "He didn't. I'm sorry." Vivian nodded once. "I believe you are." He searched her face for anger, for tears, for anything familiar. Instead, she looked almost impossibly calm. That unsettled him more than shouting ever could have. "Who were you talking to?" he asked. She adjusted the strap of her purse. "Someone I should have called sooner." "What does that mean?" She looked back toward the restaurant entrance. "It means I'm done confusing kindness with responsibility." Benjamin stared at her. He didn't understand. Not yet. She walked past him without another word and returned to the dining room. The conversation stopped almost immediately. Every eye followed her. Vivian sat down exactly where she'd been before. The $1 bill still rested beside her untouched water glass. She picked up her napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on top of the bill without looking at Sabrina. Then she smiled politely at the waiter. I think we're ready for the check. Sabrina exchanged a quick glance with Benjamin. Neither of them noticed that, at almost the exact same moment, inside Harbor Stone Capital, Vivian's updated conflict file reached the independent committee chair. Before the business day ended, copies would also be routed to compliance. And for the first time since Lawson Structural Group entered Harbor Stone's system, every remaining layer of quiet protection surrounding Benjamin's company had officially come to an end. The first email arrived 2 business days after the luncheon. Benjamin almost deleted it. The subject line read, "Request for additional supporting documentation." He frowned. "We already sent this." His controller looked over from the doorway. "What is it?" "Harbor Stone wants updated vendor files." "They have those." "Apparently, they want them again." Benjamin forwarded the message without giving it much thought. By the end of the week, 3 more requests arrived: updated consulting agreements, travel documentation, revised cash flow reporting. Nothing seemed unreasonable on its own. Together, they felt different. The flexibility Harbor Stone had shown during the restructuring was gone. Monday morning began with another meeting. Benjamin walked into the conference room carrying a folder thick enough to need 2 hands. His operations manager looked exhausted. "There's more." Benjamin dropped the folder onto the table. "What now?" "The bank." Another envelope slid across the table. Benjamin opened it. "They're asking for quarterly covenant verification. They've never done that before." "I know." Silence settled over the room. Finally, Benjamin looked up. "Did we miss something?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew. That afternoon his phone rang. It was the relationship manager from Harbor Stone. "I wanted to let you know you'll be working with a different compliance officer going forward." Benjamin frowned. "Why?" "Internal assignment." "Is there a problem?" "Nothing outside our normal procedures." The answer sounded rehearsed. Benjamin hung up feeling less informed than before the call. By Wednesday, the requests had expanded again. Accounting records, outside vendor confirmations, supporting invoices, payroll verification. Benjamin walked into accounting holding another email. "I thought this review was finished months ago." His controller adjusted her glasses. "So did I." She hesitated. "They're asking better questions now." "What does that mean?" "It means—" She searched for the right words. "Whoever's reviewing us isn't accepting assumptions anymore." Benjamin met Sabrina for dinner that evening. She listened while he described the growing list of document requests. When he finally stopped talking, she shook her head. "This isn't normal." "I know. They're squeezing you." "For what?" She leaned forward. "Competition." Benjamin looked confused. "What competition?" "You've been winning projects." She shrugged. "Somebody doesn't like it." "You really think that's it?" "I've worked around enough corporate politics." She reached for her glass. "Big companies don't always play fair." Benjamin wanted that explanation to make sense. It was simple, clear. It also required him to believe someone else was responsible. At Harbor Stone, the audit team continued quietly. One invoice led to another. Several consulting payments had been routed through companies with little operating history. Travel reimbursements lacked supporting receipts. Documentation existed. Some of it simply didn't match. The lead auditor closed one file. "Don't assume intent." Another investigator nodded. "We won't." "Verify everything. No shortcuts." The review continued. No headlines, no accusations, just patient work. Vivian knew almost nothing about the investigation. Conflict restrictions meant she no longer received routine updates involving Lawson Structural Group, exactly as she had requested. One afternoon, she crossed paths with the chairman after another board meeting. He stopped beside the elevator. "How are you doing?" She smiled politely. "I'm all right." He nodded. "I wanted you to know." He paused. "Your conflict file has been handled exactly the way you requested. I expected nothing less." "I'm sorry it became necessary." Vivian held the elevator door for him. "So am I." Neither mentioned Benjamin. Late Friday afternoon, Benjamin opened one final email before leaving the office. His expression changed immediately. What? His controller had noticed. He slowly turned the monitor toward her. The email requested that Lawson Structural Group preserve all financial records related to outside consulting engagements pending completion of compliance review. She read it twice, then looked back at him. They've escalated. Benjamin rubbed his forehead. I don't understand. Neither did she. Not yet. Across town, Sabrina was already composing a very different explanation in her own mind. She was convinced someone was attacking Benjamin's company. She just hadn't realized that the real danger wasn't coming from outside Harbor Stone. It was coming from the truth that had finally stopped being protected. Benjamin stopped by Harbor Stone without an appointment. He told himself he was there to clear up a misunderstanding. The receptionist recognized his company immediately. Good morning, Mr. Lawson. I was hoping to speak with someone about our compliance review. I'll see who's available. 10 minutes later, he was sitting across from Harbor Stone's outside legal counsel instead of the relationship manager he expected. The attorney greeted him politely. I understand you have concerns. I have questions. I'm happy to answer whatever I can. Benjamin leaned forward. Why did everything change? The attorney folded his hands. Our procedures haven't changed. They absolutely have. They're being applied consistently. Benjamin frowned. They weren't before. The attorney didn't argue. Instead, he opened a thin file. There were temporary accommodations made during your restructuring. Exactly. Those accommodations no longer exist. Benjamin blinked. What changed? The attorney studied him for a moment. You genuinely don't know. It wasn't a question. Benjamin's stomach tightened. Know what? The attorney closed the file again. I can only discuss information that isn't confidential. Then tell me that. After a long pause, the attorney spoke carefully. Your wife voluntarily requested that every matter involving your company receive extraordinary conflict protections from the day Harbor Stone first reviewed your business. Benjamin stared at him. My wife? Yes. I don't understand. I believe that. The attorney slid a document across the table. Most of it had been redacted. Only headings and signatures remained visible. At the bottom of the page was a signature Benjamin recognized instantly. Vivian Carter. He looked up. What is this? A conflict disclosure. Conflict over what? The attorney answered without hesitation. Because your wife is one of Harbor Stone's principal owners. Benjamin laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because his mind rejected the sentence before it could process it. No. The attorney said nothing. That's impossible. It isn't. Benjamin pushed the paper back. There has to be some mistake. There isn't. Silence settled between them. Finally, Benjamin spoke again. She works here. She does. I knew that. The attorney nodded. I didn't know. He couldn't finish. The attorney did it for him. How much responsibility she actually has. Benjamin slowly leaned back in his chair. I thought Harbor Stone was owned by investors. It is. And a board. Correct. So, where does Vivienne fit? The attorney chose his words carefully. Over many years, inherited partnership interests, reinvested equity, and governance consolidation resulted in Mrs. Carter becoming the firm's largest voting shareholder. Benjamin simply stared. He remembered every dinner where someone had assumed he earned more, every fundraiser, every neighborhood gathering, every moment Vivian had quietly changed the subject. She had never corrected anyone, including him. Why didn't she tell me? The attorney looked genuinely surprised. Mr. Lawson. He paused. Our understanding was that you already knew. Benjamin lowered his eyes. No. The room fell quiet again. After a few moments, the attorney opened another document. This is all I can legally say. Benjamin nodded weakly. When your company entered restructuring, Mrs. Carter immediately disclosed your marriage. He pointed to another signature. She requested complete removal from every operational decision. Benjamin swallowed. She stepped away. Entirely. She could have influenced the process. She refused to. Why? The attorney answered without hesitation. To protect both Harborstone's integrity and your dignity. Benjamin looked away. He suddenly remembered every time he'd celebrated winning the restructuring. Every time he told Vivian, "We did it." She had only smiled, never once taking credit, never once reminding him what she had given up. The attorney continued. Even after recusing herself, she made one additional request. Benjamin barely managed to ask, "What request?" "That your company receive every courtesy ethically available under policy while remaining fully compliant with governance rules." Benjamin's chest tightened. "And now?" The attorney closed the file. "That request no longer exists." Benjamin understood. Not every detail, just enough. He stood slowly. "Thank you." As he reached the door, the attorney spoke one last time. "Mr. Lawson." Benjamin stopped. "I've represented boards for almost 30 years." He hesitated. "I've seen people abuse power." Benjamin looked back. "I've almost never seen someone work so hard not to." Benjamin walked out of Harborstone feeling as though the ground beneath Charlotte had shifted. He sat inside his truck for nearly 20 minutes without starting the engine. Then he pulled the folded note from his wallet, the one Vivian had left beside a cold dinner months earlier. "Heat for 2 minutes. Love you." He had carried it every day without understanding why he couldn't throw it away. Now he did. For the first time since this began, Benjamin stopped wondering who was trying to destroy his company. Instead, one painful question kept repeating in his mind. How many times had Vivian quietly protected him, while he was busy looking somewhere else? Benjamin didn't call Sabrina that evening. For the first time in months, he let every one of her messages sit unanswered. By the next morning, she walked into his office without knocking. "There you are." Benjamin looked up from a stack of audit documents. "We need to talk." She closed the door behind her. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know." She frowned. "What's going on?" Benjamin held up one of the folders. "They're expanding the audit." She crossed her arms. "I told you, somebody's after you." He didn't answer. "They're trying to make your company look bad." Still nothing. Sabrina tilted her head. "Benjamin?" He finally spoke. "I was at Harborstone yesterday." Her expression barely changed. "So?" "I learned something." She waited. "My wife isn't just an employee." A flicker crossed Sabrina's face. "So?" "She's the largest voting shareholder." Silence. Sabrina laughed once. "That's ridiculous." "It isn't." "Who told you that?" "Harborstone's legal counsel." She stared at him, trying to decide whether he believed what he was saying. Apparently, he did. "Well," she said slowly, "if that's true, then she's probably behind all of this." Benjamin looked at her for a long moment. "She isn't. You don't know that." "I do. Benjamin." "She removed herself from every decision involving my company." Sabrina blinked. "What?" "Years ago." He pushed the redacted conflict disclosure across the desk. "She signed herself out of the process." Sabrina skimmed the page without really reading it. "That doesn't prove anything." "It proves enough." She dropped the document back onto the desk. "So now you're taking her side?" Benjamin looked genuinely confused. "This isn't about sides." "It feels like it." "No." His voice stayed calm. "It's about facts." For the first time since they'd met, Sabrina had no compliment ready, no reassurance, no easy explanation. 3 days later, Harborstone requested interviews with several outside consultants connected to Lawson Structural Group. Sabrina received one of the notices. She called Benjamin immediately. "Did you know about this?" "I expected something." "They want invoices." "They asked everyone." "They're asking for years of records." Benjamin closed his eyes briefly. "Then give them the records." Her silence lasted just a little too long. "Some of the files are complicated." Benjamin looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" "I mean, consulting work isn't always." She searched for a safer word. "Organized." His stomach tightened. "What aren't you telling me?" Nothing. Sabrina. She looked away. Some expenses were billed through different entities. Different entities? It made accounting easier. For who? She didn't answer. The audit moved quickly after that. One vendor address led to an empty office suite. Another consulting company had no employees. Several invoices referenced meetings that couldn't be verified. Nothing suggested Benjamin had created the paperwork. Everything suggested he had signed documents without asking enough questions. The investigators kept following the paper trail. It kept leading back to Sabrina. Benjamin sat with his controller late one evening. She placed another folder in front of him. I should have caught this. He opened it. Inside were consulting payments approved over 18 months. Many carried his signature. He remembered trusting Sabrina's explanations. Business development, strategic outreach, client cultivation. At the time, they had sounded reasonable. Now they sounded vague. His controller spoke quietly. We weren't looking for fraud. I know. We were trying to survive. Benjamin nodded. And that's exactly when people stop asking enough questions. Sabrina requested one final meeting. They met in the same restaurant where they had celebrated winning their first contract together. Neither ordered food. She leaned forward. I never meant for any of this. Benjamin looked at her steadily. Then what did you mean? I was trying to help you. By hiding things? I protected your confidence. He shook his head. No. She frowned. I believed in you. You believed in the version of me that never admitted he needed help. The words hung between them. Sabrina looked away first. I thought that's what you wanted. Benjamin let out a slow breath. For a while. He glanced toward the window. I think it was. Neither spoke again. When Benjamin finally stood, Sabrina didn't try to stop him. He walked out carrying nothing except the realization that had arrived far too late. The woman who constantly told him he was unstoppable had quietly encouraged every decision that kept him from seeing the truth. The woman he had betrayed had spent years making sure he never had to fall harder than necessary. Now the audit would finish its work. The marriage might not survive. And for the first time since Lawson's structural group entered trouble, Benjamin understood that losing his company was no longer the thing he feared most. Benjamin's message sat unanswered for 3 days. Can we talk? Just once. Vivian finally replied with a single sentence. Saturday, 10 o'clock, Freedom Park. Nothing else. Benjamin arrived 20 minutes early. He stood beside the lake with his hands buried in his coat pockets, watching runners pass and parents push strollers along the path. Life had kept moving. It always did. At exactly 10, Vivian walked toward him, carrying a paper cup of coffee. She wore a light sweater, jeans, and the same pearl earrings her mother had given her years ago. There was nothing about her that suggested she was one of the most influential people at Harbor Stone. There never had been. You found the place, she said. He managed a tired smile. We used to come here. We did. Neither moved to hug the other. For a moment, they simply stood together, listening to ducks splash near the shoreline. Benjamin finally spoke. I've replayed that lunch 1,000 times. Vivian looked across the water. I don't think the lunch started any of this. No. He swallowed. I think it exposed it. She nodded once. I think you're right. Another silence settled between them. This one wasn't hostile, just heavy. Benjamin let out a slow breath. I owe you more apologies than I know how to say. Vivian didn't interrupt. I kept thinking the affair was the worst thing I did. He looked down at the gravel path. It wasn't. She waited. I treated your kindness like it would always be there. His voice cracked slightly. I thought your silence meant you needed me. He laughed once without humor. It never occurred to me that your silence was a choice. Vivian wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. You wanted to be the one protecting us. I did. I understood that. He looked at her. So, why didn't you tell me? About Harbor Stone? He nodded. You should have known. She smiled sadly. I thought you already did. Benjamin blinked. What? I never hid where I worked. No. I never lied about my responsibilities. You didn't. I just never listed everything I owned. Benjamin closed his eyes briefly. I never asked. No. You let me believe. She gently finished the sentence. What everyone else believed. He nodded. I liked feeling like I was carrying us. I know. God. He rubbed his forehead. I was so proud of that. I know. There wasn't judgment in her voice, only recognition. Benjamin looked at her. You could have embarrassed me years ago. I could have. You never did. No. You protected my pride. For a while. His shoulders slumped. And then I made it impossible. Vivian didn't answer immediately. A little girl rode past them on a bicycle, laughing while her father jogged behind her. They both watched until the voices faded. My biggest mistake, Vivian said quietly, was believing love could carry something that honesty wasn't carrying. Benjamin looked at her. I kept waiting for you to tell me when you were struggling. I didn't want you to worry. I was already worried. He lowered his eyes. I thought if I could fix the company, everything else would fix itself. But you stopped letting me stand beside you. He nodded. I know. When I reached for your hand that night. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Benjamin remembered. He remembered letting go to answer Sabrina's message. He had forgotten the text. He had never forgotten her hand. I'd give anything to take that moment back. Vivian looked at him for a long second. I believe you. Hope flashed across his face. It disappeared when she continued. But believing you isn't the same as being able to live there again. Benjamin's eyes filled. I understand. For the first time in months, he actually did. There was no argument left, no explanation, no defense, only consequences. Vivienne set her empty coffee cup into a nearby trash can. I never wanted revenge, Benjamin. I know. I just couldn't keep protecting someone who didn't even know I was doing it. He nodded slowly. I didn't lose you that day at the restaurant. She met his eyes one last time. No, you'd been saying goodbye for a long time. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them finally told the truth they had both spent years avoiding. And for the first time since their marriage began to unravel, neither of them tried to fill it. The audit concluded 6 weeks later. Lawson Structural Group survived. Barely. The final agreement wasn't a rescue. It was a reset. The company would continue operating under stricter financial oversight, quarterly compliance reviews, independent expense approvals, and new governance requirements. Benjamin remained president, but for the first time since inheriting the business, every major financial decision required another set of eyes. When his attorney slid the paperwork across the conference table, Benjamin signed without arguing. A year earlier, he would have seen the conditions as an insult. Now they felt earned. The board meeting lasted less than an hour. When it ended, Benjamin gathered his papers while the attorney quietly said, "For what it's worth." Benjamin looked up. Companies recover from financial mistakes. He nodded. Sometimes. The attorney closed his notebook. Pride takes longer. Benjamin managed a faint smile. I've noticed. Sabrina's situation unfolded very differently. The compliance investigation determined that several consulting arrangements had bypassed normal documentation standards. Some vendor entities she used failed basic verification requirements, and numerous expense submissions lacked adequate support. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no public arrest, just interviews, lawyers, professional consequences. The consulting contracts ended. Several industry contacts quietly stopped returning her calls. One afternoon, she left a voicemail for Benjamin. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. A long pause. I never thought it would end like this. He listened to the message once, then deleted it. Not because he hated her, because there was nothing left to say. Vivian never attended the final restructuring meeting. She wasn't supposed to. Her conflict restrictions remained exactly where she'd insisted they stay. Another partner represented Harbor Stone instead. She spent that afternoon reviewing investment proposals involving a manufacturing company outside Raleigh. Business continued, just as it always had. When the meeting ended, one of the younger analysts caught up with her near the elevators. "I've always wondered something." Vivian smiled. "That's usually how difficult conversations start." The analyst laughed. "Why do you never mention everything you've accomplished?" She thought about the question. "My mother spent her whole life teaching me that the loudest person in the room usually isn't the strongest." The analyst nodded thoughtfully. "I'll remember that. I hope you remember the rest too." "What's the rest?" Vivian pressed the elevator button. "Power is easiest to misuse when people think you've earned the right to." The doors opened. She stepped inside. The conversation ended there. Months passed. Lawson Structural Group slowly stabilized. The company became smaller than before, more careful. Benjamin personally met with department heads every Friday morning. He asked more questions than he answered now. Sometimes he caught himself about to dismiss a concern. Instead, he'd stop and say, "Tell me more." Employees noticed the difference. Trust returned slowly. Not because Benjamin demanded it, because he had finally learned to listen. One Sunday afternoon, Benjamin visited his mother's house. She handed him a glass of iced tea before either of them spoke. "You look tired." "I've been tired for a while." She nodded toward the porch swing. They sat together without talking. Finally, she asked, "Have you seen Vivienne?" "A few weeks ago." "How is she?" Benjamin smiled sadly. "Still, Vivienne." His mother smiled too. "I always liked that about her." "So did I." She looked at him carefully. "You still do." He stared out across the backyard. "I always will." His mother reached over and squeezed his hand. Neither of them tried to fix anything. Some things couldn't be fixed, only accepted. As Benjamin drove home that evening, he realized something had changed. For months, he'd measured success by whether he could save his company. Now he found himself hoping for something much quieter, that one day, if Vivian ever thought about him, she would remember the man he eventually became, instead of only the one who had let her down. 3 months later, Vivian cleaned out the bottom drawer of her desk. Most of it was ordinary. Old notebooks, conference badges, a pen that no longer worked. Near the back of the drawer, she found a small envelope she'd tucked away after the luncheon. She already knew what was inside. She opened it anyway. The $1 bill slid into her hand. The crease down the middle was still there. For a moment, she simply looked at it. Not with anger, not even with sadness, just recognition. She walked to the bookshelf in her office and pulled down the worn leather notebook Denise had kept for years. Inside were grocery lists, investment notes, reminders to call friends, and little sentences her mother had written whenever life taught her something worth remembering. Vivian turned to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. Real wealth isn't what people notice. It's what protects you when nobody's looking. She smiled. Then she carefully placed the folded dollar bill between those pages and closed the notebook. It belonged there now, not because of what it was worth, because of what it had finally taught her. That afternoon, she left Harbor Stone a little earlier than usual. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she heard someone call her name. "Vivienne." She turned. Benjamin stood across the street. He looked healthier than he had in months. Not happier, just steadier. He crossed only after the light changed. "I wasn't sure you'd stop." "I almost didn't." He nodded. "I know." Neither of them seemed uncomfortable with the silence anymore. Benjamin reached into his coat pocket. "I found something." He unfolded a small piece of paper. Vivian recognized it immediately. The note she'd left beside his untouched dinner months before. "Heat for 2 minutes. Love you." "I kept it," he said quietly. "I know." He looked surprised. "You knew?" She smiled. "You carried it in your wallet." He laughed softly. "I guess you noticed everything." "Not everything." "Enough." He folded the note again. "I thought about throwing it away 100 times." "But you didn't." "No." Another quiet moment passed. Benjamin looked at her. "I used to think strength meant being the person everyone depended on." Vivian listened. "I was wrong." He glanced down at the note in his hand. "Sometimes strength is being the person who helps without needing anyone to know." Vivian didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. I hope you never forget that. I won't. He believed it. So did she. For the first time since they had met, they weren't speaking as husband and wife. They were simply two people telling each other the truth. Benjamin slipped the note back into his wallet. I won't keep you. She nodded. Take care of yourself. You too. Neither reached for a handshake. Neither tried for a hug. Some goodbyes, didn't need one. Vivian walked toward the parking garage without looking back. Benjamin watched until she disappeared from view. Only then did he realize what he had truly lost. It wasn't Harborstone's influence. It wasn't the financial protection she had quietly provided. It wasn't even the marriage. It was the rare privilege of being loved by someone who had never needed credit for carrying more than half the weight. He had mistaken quietness for dependence, silence for weakness, humility for a lack of success. By the time he understood the difference, the life they could have built together already belonged to memory. And somewhere inside a worn leather notebook, a single $1 bill rested between two pages, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as proof that dignity will always outlast pride, and that the greatest wealth a person can possess is the character they keep when nobody is watching. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to let us know in the comments. Have you ever stayed quiet to protect someone, only to realize they mistook your kindness for weakness? Or do you think Vivian should have told Benjamin the truth about who she really was long before everything fell apart? I genuinely love to hear what you think. If this story reminded you that trust, humility, and honesty matter far more than pride, please like this video and share it with someone who might need this reminder today. And if you're new to Mr. Graham's stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We bring you original stories that stay with you long after they're over. Stories about love, family, second chances, and the choices that shape our lives. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who chooses dignity over revenge.
Thank you for watching Mr. Graham Stories, my beautiful, amazing family.